You are now tuned into the truth frequency.
We are TFR. TFR.
Truth Frequency Radio.
London calling. This is London calling on Longgrave. London calling. This is Westminster.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
Dad, I'm okay.
My life was my life.
I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons.
Come on, Mrs. Jones. You've got to go to your second job now. You've got to earn extra money to pay the bedroom tax. I'm very lucky. I've got a second job in a chemical plant. Yeah, I'm making fluoride for Syria. They're shipping it to Syria.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to join Chris Everard in an undisclosed location deep under Buckingham Palace in Winston Churchill's war bunker.
Never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
God damn it, boy! These Brits are coming to get us!
Welcome, my friends, to the show which never ends.
My husband and I are not amused.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Deep from inside the former communist bloc, where we now torture American citizens in Poland and the Balkan states, we're tuning in to the Chris Everard Show. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Everard, and we are broadcasting live on the Truth Frequency. Good morning, good day, good evening. This is Chris Everard broadcasting live on the Truth Frequency, and we're also broadcasting live on AM via Stirling, Radio Stirling in Scotland, and in the second hour we are broadcasting on FM in the south of Italy with Radio Calabria, and we are also being covered over the Denver area on FM with 90.7 FM. And in a couple of weeks' time, hopefully we'll be joined by 500,000 listeners in the north of England, in Manchester. I wish you all a great day, a great evening, wherever you are. And in today's show, we're going to be investigating the biggest government BBC scandal of recent times. We're going to be investigating how MI5 and MI6 failed to do background checks on people who the BBC employed, who were then given very prestigious jobs. They were given rock star lifestyle, kind of millionaire wages. And these people were actually running a sex crime paedophile ring inside the BBC. And literally hundreds of underage children were sexually abused on BBC premises. And this is the biggest scandal to have hit Britain for a long time. It's actually triggered 2 independent police inquiries, which are long overdue. It's also triggered a backlash from British BBC licence fee payers. In Britain, you have to pay a licence to have a television in your house. Otherwise, you get people knocking on your door, asking you for a fine. And this is a scam. That money is collected by private agencies and also by Her Majesty's Royal Mail, and that money is then used to fund the lifestyles, the rock star lifestyles of these millionaire paedophiles who have been trumped up and put up as being children's entertainers by the BBC for decades. Now, this is no conspiracy theory. This is real. And just a couple of days ago, on Friday, actually, we had Rolf Harris, who a lot of people probably don't know Rolf Harris, but in the Australian world and in the United Kingdom, Rolf Harris has been a children's television entertainer for many decades. He has had hit records such as Two Little Boys and Jake the Peg with a Wooden Leg, and he's made millions and millions of pounds. He has been promoted by the BBC as being an all-round good guy, somebody that you can leave your children with, and you can trust this guy. He was also paid directly by the government for swimming government information films urging children to take up swimming and to take up swimming lessons. And those commercials which featured Rolf Harris were actually funded directly by Her Majesty's government, and they were actually broadcast in cinemas all over the United Kingdom and all over the British Commonwealth. Rolf Harris is very good friends with Her Majesty the Queen and other members of the royal family. Just recently, Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II sat for a portrait painting by Rolf Harris, and there are many hundreds of photographs of Rolf Harris laughing and chatting away with his royal friends in the royal family that occupy the throne of London at Buckingham Palace. And this is yet again another major BBC paedophile scandal where somebody who's been paid millions of pounds over the years has been given awards and honours by the royal family, and yet they were using their position of trust, they were abusing their positions of trust, and they were actually using BBC premises. I'm talking about BBC theatres, the dressing rooms in theatres, the dressing rooms in BBC television studios as venues for molesting and buggering many hundreds, some people say thousands, of underage children. Like I say, this is not a conspiracy theory. This really happened. And just this Friday, just gone, Rolf Harris was eventually sentenced. But this sentence that's been handed down to him is only 5 years or so. He will only serve probably about 3 years. He might only serve about 2 years. There are people who have been jailed for shoplifting, say stealing a minor domestic product from a supermarket, and they've had longer sentences than Rolf Harris. Rolf Harris is a long-term paedophile who groomed children, who used his BBC status, his stardom and his status. And basically, this has been going on for around 40 years as far as Rolf Harris is concerned. Well, the listeners may, hear this and they may think, well, Chris, you're making a big deal out of it. It's just one guy. It's just one man, and he abused his position of power as a BBC children's entertainer. Well, I've got news for our listeners, especially our listeners. We've got hundreds of thousands of listeners in the Americas, in South America, Canada, and the USA. They may not know these names, which I'm now going to read out, but I can assure you, without any reservations whatsoever, the names of these people, which I'm going to read out, are very famous people who are well known to BBC viewers across the British Commonwealth, which includes actually more than 30 countries. Rolf Harris, jailed on Friday, just this Friday just gone. Stuart Hall, he was the children's entertainer and presenter of It's a Knockout. He also received huge salaries, was paid very, very well by the BBC. He also groomed and buggered children over a very long period of time. We're looking at a career of more than 20 years. I think it could actually be more than 30 years. Stuart Hall. Now, Stuart Hall presented It's a Royal Knockout as a special edition. He had members of the royal family, the British royal family, as his personal guests on his personal show. He was very well connected. He personally received a royal honour from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, as did Rolf Harris, who was jailed on Friday. Stuart Hall was jailed just a couple of weeks ago. And Stuart Hall, as I say, he had a paedophile career bolstered by his, high-profile millionaire lifestyle as a BBC presenter of shows popular with children. And he's also gone behind bars. Just a year or so ago, about a year and a half ago, we all of a sudden had the police in London admit that they'd actually opened up a major investigation following the recent death of Sir Jimmy Savile. Sir Jimmy Savile is a knight of the realm. He was friends with Rolf Harris. He was friends with Stuart Hall. And Sir Jimmy Savile also led a millionaire rock star lifestyle. He came from the north of England. I believe that he is related to the Savile Italian family. And this man was not only friends with Queen Elizabeth II, but Prince Charles actually visited the Scottish home of Sir Jimmy Savile. Jimmy Savile also appeared on the Parkinson BBC television show, bragging that he'd been invited for a personal party at Buckingham Palace. He arrived in his white Rolls-Royce and he was bragging that he'd smuggled a teenage girl in the boot of his Rolls-Royce, and he introduced this teenage girl to Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh. Of course, anyone who's listened to my previous shows and watched my documentaries on the Enigma channel, that's enigmatv.com, would know that Prince Philip is not Scottish. He doesn't have a drop of Scottish blood in him. He's actually a German Dane, and his father is the self-styled prince or king of Greece, but his family was actually kicked out of Greece by the Greek people because they started overtaxing them. Prince Philip is on record as making racist remarks over and over again, and he was friends with Sir Jimmy Savile, who died recently. Sir Jimmy Savile received a knighthood. He became a knight of the realm. He was personally awarded this by Her Majesty the Queen, and he was also great friends with the Queen's mother. He also received a papal knighthood as well, and this is something which I'm investigating at the moment because Pope Benedict, the previous pope, is now retired. Everyone says that he's actually still running the Vatican by remote control, and he's living in a very plush palace called Palace Savile, which is about 60 miles away from the Vatican. And at the moment, I am investigating to find out whether Jimmy Savile and the Italian Savile family are linked, because it seems very odd and very suspicious to me that Sir Jimmy Savile would receive a knighthood from the Queen. He would have Prince Charles turning up at his Scottish residence, making personal house calls. And then on top of that, he was also given a papal knighthood by the Vatican. Dear listener, these things are all interrelated, and as anybody knows who listens to my shows, I do not deal in conspiracy theories. If you've tuned into this show expecting me to tell you that the moon is made from titanium or Swiss cheese, and we're all being run by reptilian humanoids and all this kind of thing, I'm sorry, you'll have to go somewhere else. We're dealing in hardcore information which is now confirmed, and Scotland Yard and the British Metropolitan Police have not only been making arrests, they've actually been pushing forward prosecutions. And we have now got within our grasp full-on, hardcore evidence that shows that the BBC, and I'm not talking about just these BBC presenters that I've mentioned so far in the show, I'm talking about BBC executives, BBC producers, BBC television directors, and especially BBC current affairs executives, all knew what was happening in those dressing rooms with Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, and Sir Jimmy Savile. In actual fact, a famous American DJ who's been working for the BBC, Paul Gambaccini, had his office down the same corridor at Broadcasting House as Jimmy Savile, and as soon as Jimmy Savile died, Paul Gambaccini went public and he said that it was common knowledge amongst the staff at Broadcasting House that Sir Jimmy Savile had children in his dressing room. He had children at the BBC television studios, and he had children at the BBC Broadcasting House building, which is the epicenter of the giant worldwide BBC radio empire. Now, I've been to Broadcasting House several times. I've been a guest on the BBC many times. And what you will see above the main entrance is a carving by a gentleman called Eric Gill, or Eric Gill. And he was outed as a paedophile in his own lifetime. And more than 100 years ago, or roughly about 100 years ago, a special statue, and in actual fact it was a series of statues, were carved by Eric Gill. He was paid an enormous sum of money for those days by the BBC. And above the entrance of Broadcasting House, this very building that's been the venue for not dozens but hundreds of sexual molestations of children, hundreds of instances of buggery, above the doorway, above the actual entrance of Broadcasting House in London, we have a statue of an old man in magician's robes pulling the arms of a young child, a young boy. He's about 8 or 9 years old. And supposedly the old man is meant to be Prospero. And supposedly the young boy, who's completely naked and is being pulled out into a kind of spread eagle shape, is meant to be Ariel, who is this apprentice or this novice of the magician. Ladies and gentlemen, all of these things are interrelated. None of this has happened by accident. The BBC, right from the very beginning, were planning and did, in actual fact, abuse their position of trust with the British people, with all of the BBC viewers across the British Commonwealth worldwide. MI5 and MI6 are famous for running very strict background checks on people who are just going for normal jobs at various corporations. I ask you this: how is it that the BBC managed to employ Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, and Sir Jimmy Savile for decades and allow their premises to be used as the venues for sex crimes against children without MI5 and MI6 ever doing a background check, with people like Prince Charles turning up on the doorstep of Jimmy Savile's house in Scotland, paying a personal visit and having cups of tea? Where is Her Majesty's Intelligence Services? It is very obvious. Not only did the elite management, and I'm talking about the top management close to the Director General's office at the BBC, not only those top elite managers of the BBC, but it is very obvious that the intelligence service kind of supremos, I'm talking about the directors of MI5, directors of MI6, the assistant directors, the intelligence chief bureaus, the liaison officers between Mossad, CIA, FBI, who are all stationed in London, they must have known what was going on. The logic in what I'm saying is this: how is it that American DJ Paul Gambaccini, who's been a BBC presenter himself for more than 30 years, how is it that American DJ Paul Gambaccini knew exactly what was going on in that corridor, and yet we're meant to believe that the bosses of MI5 and the bosses of MI6, the Director General of the BBC Board of Governors, and all of the production staff at BBC Broadcasting House, and also the BBC Television Centre, where Sir Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harris and Stuart Hall hosted their children's television extravaganzas for many decades. How is it that we are now meant to believe that those people, those top executives and those intelligence officers knew nothing? It's a scam. It's a scandal, and it's a pedo ring at the heart of the BBC. What I'm going to say to you now is actually breaking the law. I know I'm going to be breaking the law, but, justice, sometimes you have to do ugly things to actually achieve justice. What I'm going to say to people is that you tell all your friends, you tell all your family that when they come to your house, don't use the doorbell. Just knock on the door, have a special knock like dut, 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 so you know that it's always somebody that you know, because that will save you a lot of money, because that means that you will not have to pay for a BBC license anymore. They have the names and the addresses of every single person in the British Commonwealth, especially in the United Kingdom, who buys a television, and they use that information from the receipts provided by the electrical retailers where you buy your television sets to knock on everyone's door. They even have so-called detector vans detecting whether you're watching television or not. And what I'm saying to you is tell all your friends and family, don't use the doorbell, have a happy knock, have a code where you knock on the door so you know it's a member of your family or a friend. And then when these unscrupulous people knock on your door demanding fines for you not paying the BBC, who employ paedophiles, you won't have to answer the door because you'll know it's a stranger's knock. And that, I know, is against the law, but I'm sorry. The end of the BBC has to come now. We need a major change in terms of the BBC. The BBC has not been fulfilling its obligations according to its original remit that was laid down, I think it was 91 years ago. I'd have to look up the exact number of years, but it's many decades. The BBC's original remit was to bring to the British public the types of radio and television programs which would not be commercially feasible, which would not be commercially viable. In other words, the arts. The BBC should be supporting the arts. They should be supporting orchestras, ballets, artistic people, and bringing you, the viewer and the listener, items and subjects which commercial television ignores because they think that there's not enough money in it. Now, we have a break coming up. This is a very important show. When we come up after the break, we're going to be talking about the secrets inside British intelligence. My name is Chris Everard. My website is christophereverard.com. It gets visits from all over the planet. You can go there now. You can download free PDF ebooks from my website. I also make documentaries for the Enigma channel. That's enigmatv.com, enigmatv.com, enigmatv.com. You can sign up for free. We're quite happy to send you a free TV guide with hot clickable links to documentaries covering subjects which the mainstream media hide. And when we come back after this break, I'm going to be talking about the secrets of Her Majesty's British Intelligence Service. And I'm also going to be discussing how this massive BBC scandal resulted in a huge cover-up, because the BBC's flagship news and current affairs investigative program called Newsnight actually conspired against the British people. the executives of Newsnight suppressed an investigation into Sir Jimmy Savile, the friend of the royal family who had actually buggered many, many dozens of children on BBC premises for decades. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about the secrets of inside British intelligence and how British intelligence officers were actually planting bombs in Ireland. And in the second hour, we have Kev Baker from the Kev Baker Show up in Scotland joining us. We're going to be discussing not only Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, Jeremy Paxman. We're going to be discussing government ministers and a whole load of government files that were given to the Home Secretary by a member of Parliament detailing sex crimes by senior government ministers, and how more than 100 of those files have mysteriously disappeared. So, my name is Chris Everard. I thank you for tuning in. If you've just stumbled on me and you've stumbled on this show, there is a vast archive of my radio shows at truthfrequencyradio.com. And before the break, I'd like to thank Chris Geo and Sherry Geo for putting this network together. I'd like to thank all the lads at Radio Stirling up in Scotland and also Radio Calabria who've been carrying my broadcasts and helped me break the story about the mafia dumping nuclear waste in the Mediterranean Sea in January 2012. And I'm making a new film about that as well. So we have that break. It's a very short break. See you soon.
Like a cancer that's silently spreading.
Agent for Truth with Joe Bannister. Sundays on Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome back. This is Chris Everard broadcasting live from London on the Truth Frequency Radio Network and also on Radio Stirling. And you can pick us up on FM in Denver on 90.7 FM. And I want to start this section of the show by reading a section from a book called Inside British Intelligence by Gordon Thomas. I just want to read you this. In December 1972, 2 explosions rocked central Dublin in Ireland. Initially, the Irish Republican Army was blamed, but the Irish Special Branch Police established that the bombers had been aided by Her Majesty's MI5 military intelligence spy agency in planting the bombs. On December the 19th, the Irish police had sufficient evidence to inform the British ambassador to Ireland that unless he withdrew his first secretary, Andrew Johnston, on the grounds that he was a senior British military intelligence officer, in other words, a spy, there was a risk of diplomatic ties between the two countries being broken. That is a quote from a huge book. I'll just tell you how many pages it is. I think it's something like, it's more than 500 pages. It's by Gordon Thomas. It's called Inside British Intelligence. I have a huge library of books about British intelligence. My grandfather worked for the diplomatic service, which is a euphemism for the spy network. All of these embassies around the world where you see the so-called diplomats, they are actually safe houses for the spies that actually basically collect industrial espionage from around the planet. And there's been huge technological advances in spying in recent years. I'd say in the last 35 years, we now no longer need the old-fashioned form of spying where they would dress up as cat burglars and they would burgle your house. Nowadays, it's all done electronically. There are fractal imaging cameras on spy satellites, and they can actually read newspaper print from outer space at a geostationary orbit of about 320 miles up. And now, of course, we have this new phenomenon of drones. These are spy drones. Some of them are helicopters, some of them are jet planes, and they can actually trace you and your car, you and your family, you and your friends. And this is where we are going in this new world order. And if you've just stumbled on my broadcast, I want to say this to you. I do not deal in conspiracy theories at all. And if you do a little bit of research on the internet, you will find that major household brands to do with the internet, such as Google, have been using their considerable financial clout to purchase robotics companies. And this is a subject which we've done previous shows on. And if you want, you can actually go through the archives at truthfrequencyradio.com. And you can also look at my documentary films entitled The Illuminati, which is the world's first 5-part political documentary film series. And in my films, in the Illuminati film series, and also in another film which I made in 2010 called Superstate, you will see very advanced robots walking, riding bicycles, riding motorcycles, driving cars, shooting guns, shooting machine guns, doing all the kinds of police work which we've come to expect in a riot situation. And now we have Google investing in companies such as Boston Dynamics, and they have a whole new kind of breed of robotic animals, such as robot dogs, robot mules, robot donkeys, and there's even a robot cheetah that can chase you and your family and your friends down the street at 70 miles per hour. This is where the intelligence agencies are going, and just this week, Her Majesty the Queen smashed a bottle of whiskey over the bows of a giant supercarrier, a giant aircraft carrier, weighs 65,000 tons. There's actually 2 of these new supercarriers in the new Royal Navy fleet. Why? Why is Buckingham Palace wasting our money launching huge supercarriers? Well, I'll tell you why, is because all of the RAF pilots, all of the ground crew, all of the naval officers, all of the submarine commanders, I can tell you now, if you're a soldier, if you're an infantryman, if you're in the military services, you're not going to have a job for much longer. There isn't a single sector of the military services that isn't going to be replaced by some form of robot. Google Maps is the brain that is being used to power these robot soldiers, robot dogs, robot mules, robot helicopters, robot planes, and now robot supercarriers, robotic aircraft carriers. There's very few staff on board. They have a range of 10,000 miles, and the planes which take off and land on the deck of these supercarriers have no pilots. These are drone armadas. Who is the enemy? Why is Her Majesty the Queen spending £6.62 billion on supercarriers? Who is our enemy in this day and age? I'll tell you who. It's you. You and the general public are the enemy. And if you think it through, and if you really carefully analyze the news reports and this charade of lies which you see being broadcast on CNN, ABC, NBC, and all of the three alphabet letter news feeds, which all have basically the same sources, you will eventually come to the same conclusion that I and millions of other people have come to, and that is that we, the people, are the enemy of the elite. And so coming back to Gordon Thomas's book here, it's got a picture of the new MI6 building Vauxhall on the River Thames in London, inside British intelligence. What you will find as you go through this book, and I have many other books right here, I've got them here in my studio, books such as The Death Lobby, which is explaining how Western firms like Matrix Churchill actually funded weapons and shipped weapons to Saddam Hussein. Other books such as Spycatcher, written by the former assistant director of MI5, Peter Wright. It had to be published in Australia because Margaret Thatcher spent hundreds of thousands of pounds of British taxpayers' money trying to stop Spycatcher from being published. Why? Because in that book, Spycatcher, written by one of the top spies of all time, he revealed what the agenda was. And the agenda of the intelligence services is to stop you and to stop me and to stop our friends and our families from having true freedom of speech. The internet is being slowed down, and the internet is increasingly under the control of a very, very narrow group of people who all come from the same geographical area, which is San Francisco. I'm talking about eBay, Facebook, Google, YouTube, you name it. They come from California. Many of those bosses had the exact same professors, the exact same teachers at Stanford University. What you are seeing is the slow motion takeover of the internet. They've taken the internet, the information superhighway, which, by the way, is never actually even mentioned in terms of being a resource of great information. For example, the BBC do not run any television show at all giving you information about what you can find on the internet. It's almost as if the internet is for shopping, and that's it. What we're seeing, ladies and gentlemen, is we're seeing net neutrality, which is a code word used for a new set of measures that's going to mean that eBay, Amazon, Facebook, all of the household kitchen sink brands on the internet, their sites will run perfectly. And if you have any websites which are critical and promoting gun control or gun ownership, I should say, or they're promoting freedom of speech, or they are telling you information like my show, which the mainstream media, sort of whitewash. All of those independent sources of information and news will be harder to find. They will not be turning up in search results on various search engines, whichever one you choose to use. Google have got Google Maps, and Google Maps, as I said before, are providing the brains to this new global army of cyber warriors, cyber cops, cyber soldiers, cyber sailors, cyber ships. If you end up on one of these lists as a potential terrorist threat, or if you even get listed as a terrorist, the judge, the jury, and the executioner may actually turn up on your doorstep in the form of a robot, or may fly over your house and constantly circle your house. And we are fast approaching the futuristic, but it's no longer the futurist today, of the terrible social demise which we see in things like 2000 AD, that comic with Judge Dredd, where there is no jury. There is no judge any longer. There's just a robot knocking on your car window telling you that you've broken the law, and if you contest that point, potentially you, your family, your friends, your children may be executed under some kind of jumped up kangaroo legal bullshit law. This is where we're going. This is what they want. And there is more than enough evidence from the official mainstream news feeds that proves what I've just said to you is actually happening. I'm not talking about a conspiracy theory that's going to happen in the future. I'm talking about what's happening right now. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm not trying to make you live in fear. I am just informing you, using my radio show and also through my documentaries, what is actually happening. I don't want you to live in fear. I don't want you to cower behind your front door worried about somebody putting a shotgun through the letterbox and trying to kill you. I don't want to do that. That's not my business. What I'm telling you is that the standard mainstream television, standard mainstream radio, and all of those newspapers and all those mainstream magazines, you cannot rely on them to actually tell you the truth about what your tax money is being used to fund. Now, let's just come back to these supercarriers. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth launched this 65,000-ton supercarrier bristling with weapons. These are laser-guided weapons. They're GPS-guided weapons, intercontinental nuclear missiles. That's one missile. It leaves the atmosphere. It splits itself into maybe 170 mini nukes. Those nukes all have mini rocket engines, and they spread out in space, re-enter the atmosphere, and blow up 170 targets. That's 170 cities with a 4-minute warning. This is the real weapons of mass destruction. Forget Saddam Hussein. The weapons of mass destruction are in the hands of the elite. The elite of the USA, the elite of the British Commonwealth. There's very few other countries that have intercontinental nuclear ballistic missiles. Now, if you factor in these supercarriers carrying hundreds of drone planes, and the new British drone, which has been built by British Aerospace, is called Tenaris. That's the name of an ancient god in the ancient world where children were actually offered up to this god in sacrifice, and they were thrown into a pit of fire. Like I said at the beginning of this, none of these things are happening by accident. This is all planned. They could have chosen any other name for this British Aerospace drone, but they chose the name of a god where people in the ancient world used to sacrifice their children through fire. Now, coming back to British intelligence and the history of British intelligence, there are some very, very interesting chapters in this book by Gordon Thomas explaining all of the various bribes which are given to British members of Parliament and British members of the House of Lords in order to actually squash opponents to certain laws which are being introduced that actually limit the freedoms of the members of the public. One little paragraph I want to read you here. It says, meanwhile, the London government had passed the Secret Service Fund, which would remain unchallenged for another 200 years. The Secret Service Fund and the money inside the fund was misused. Members of Parliament misappropriated it to finance election campaigns, and one Tory Prime Minister, Lord Bute, even used £80,000 of the Secret Service fund to bribe members of Parliament so that they would support his policies. Another Prime Minister, William Pitt, insisted that the fund was essential for his government to deal with the threat of domestic subversion, that's what terrorism used to be called in the old days, following the French Revolution. For all his rhetoric, few people believed William Pitt. There was a growing mood in the country that financing information gathering, in other words MI5 and MI6, was only another means for politicians to indulge in corruption. What I'm saying is that all of these slush funds, and you can see here I'm talking about the Secret Service Fund, there's many other black slush funds. They don't have millions of pounds in them, they have billions of pounds in them. These fund the bombing of innocent people. They fund the bombing of the people. Why did MI5 collaborate with terrorists in Ireland and place those bombs in Dublin? I'll tell you why. It's about money, it's about taxation, it's about control. Buckingham Palace wants to control Ireland, all of Ireland. Buckingham Palace wants to control all of Europe. The Tsars, such as Tsar Nicholas of Russia, was the cousin of the old King George. These royal families are in control. Do not get hoodwinked by, say, for example, King Juan Carlos abdicating, which he did just recently, and just over a year ago, Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands also left her post. Do not get put off by this. Just because a certain king or queen has abdicated does not mean that the royal kind of oligarchy, the royal firm, the royal industry is not still influencing what government ministers say and do. How do I know this? How can I completely and utterly say to you that this is not a conspiracy theory? It's very simple. British newspapers have just recently exposed the fact that 200 letters, more than 200 letters, have been written by Prince Charles to British ministers. He's unelected, and this unelected man, Prince Charles, is telling them what to say, what to do, what he likes, what he wants them to actually do on his behalf, what policies he doesn't like, what policies he wants them to follow. Make no mistake, all of these royal families run the show. They even have the audacity to claim that they have personal poverty in their families. That is obviously a lie. The Royal Treasury, the Royal Mint, Her Majesty's Government, Her Majesty's Palace of Westminster, all of these organisations, Her Majesty's Intelligence Services, that has the crown and the all-seeing eye as part of the MI5 logo. This all proves to us what is going on. And those bombs in Dublin are just one example. Her Majesty's Intelligence Services have been planting bombs, and they have been infiltrating countries, especially in Africa, in order to get resources such as gold, oil, and diamonds for many decades. They have been fostering civil war in Sierra Leone and Angola, and they have been suppressing the African people, because below the feet of those African peasant people, there are such massive amounts of wealth. There's uranium, titanium, gold, silver, platinum, palladium, sapphires, emeralds. There's oil. And yet we see Africa being the poorest nation on the planet. In actual fact, there is an emergency situation unfolding as I am speaking to you right now in the Sudan. The Sudanese kings were the last pharaohs of Egypt, and Egypt and Sudan are really very important geopolitical countries for Buckingham Palace. And Egypt was actually controlled by Buckingham Palace, as was the Sudan, right up until recent times. And I can tell you now that Buckingham Palace wants control over the Sudan, just as they had back in the 1800s with Khartoum, under the control of General Gordon, who answered to Buckingham Palace and the family of Queen Victoria. That colonial control over the Sudan is coming back, ladies and gentlemen, and the Sudanese people are starving, and the newspapers in Britain have been lax in telling people about this famine scam in the Sudan. And right now, 4 million Sudanese people, they don't have food, but they do have vaccines. Isn't it funny how these plane loads of vaccines always arrive, and yet the food never arrives? The Sudan has a resource which Buckingham Palace wants, and that is solar power. Egypt, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Jordan, Israel, Palestine, all of these are countries where solar power can be harvested easily, and it can be piped across the Mediterranean into those southern Mediterranean economies that manufacture cars and keep the European superstate economy running. The EU superstate government, as I've said in many broadcasts in the years gone by, especially in the last 18 months, the EU superstate is issuing policies which are designed in secret, and many of those EU superstate commissioners are former British ministers. They take their orders from Buckingham Palace. They do not take their orders from you and me. Now, we're going to come up to the second half of the show very, very soon. And we have Kev Baker from the Kev Baker Show, who's going to join us live. And we're going to be discussing some other fascinating subjects that have been cropping up in the news. And in this second hour that's coming up, what I want to talk about is also Newsnight, the BBC's premier, #1 investigative current affairs program, suppressing a report and suppressing an investigation, a video investigation on Sir Jimmy Savile. What we can see is that Harriet Harman, a former minister with Tony Blair, the top woman in British government for many years, when she was a lawyer in her younger years, she was promoting Magpie, a magazine to do with paedophiles. And she's a senior government minister. Now we have a break coming up. There's a very short break. Kev is coming up, and stay with us.
Real people, real radio. Wherever you are, make it TFR. Truth Frequency Radio.
London calling. This is London calling on Longgrave. London calling. This is Westminster.
I am not a number. I am a free man.
I'm okay.
My life is my own.
I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons.
Come on, Mrs. Jones. You've got to go to your second job now. You've got to earn extra money to pay the bedroom tax. I'm very lucky. I've got a second job in a chemical plant. Yeah, I'm making fluoride for Syria. They're shipping it to Syria.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
My lords, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to join Chris Everard in an undisclosed location deep under Buckingham Palace in Winston Churchill's war bunker.
Let's never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
God damn it, boy! These Brits are coming to get us!
Welcome, my friends, to the show which never ends. My husband and I are not amused.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order.
Deep from inside the former communist bloc, where we now torture American citizens in Poland or Balkan states, we're tuning in to the Chris Everard Show.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Everard, and we are broadcasting live on the Truth Frequency. Back. We're at the top of the second hour of the Chris Everard Show. We're broadcasting live, and we have a special guest, Mr. Kev Baker from Scotland. Are you with us, Kev?
Certainly are, Chris. It's a pleasure to be back on your show. Ever since we said we were going to do this more regularly, it's as if the universe has transpired to bring obstacles up to prevent that.
Well, that does happen. That does happen. But we'll get through it. I've been planning some new kind of video clips and things. Really, basically, just my investigations in the last 4 weeks have been centering around Iraq and the Jewish community that was expelled, and the Yazidis, who are a cult of the Kurds. And I've written a new electronic book. It's in the iBook format, so you can swipe through the pages, you can tap the images, and you've got links to websites, so you can see my original sources. And it's taken up a lot of my time over the last 4 weeks, but I will do some new video investigations, and we'll host those on your YouTube channel and also my YouTube channel as well.
I definitely look forward to seeing that, Chris. And I just want to thank you for a fantastic first half of the show.
It's a pleasure. What I basically want to say, the reason I chose these particular subjects for today's show is that sex and sexual blackmail in the political world can never be underestimated as being the most powerful tool to manipulate what you want those politicians to do and say. And this is something which I've been, I've been on this kind of tack of investigating this for many years. And what brought me to this conclusion is if you put somebody in power, like, just take Peter Mandelson, for example, or Baroness Ashton, who's the major British politician who is the liaison between Buckingham Palace and the EU superstate. You really are taking a great risk if you're the monarch, if you're the king or the queen, and you put these people into positions of power, and they can be lawmakers. You have to have the strings. You have to have, kind of checks and balances built into your relationship, because otherwise you could end up with a situation where they're making laws which are going to hamper, your business interests.
And that's why you see so many of these paedophiles being elevated to these positions.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Just when you were going through that first half the show, I was taking a little dig about the net for any recent stories on the Leon Britton controversy, which is breaking. But before we get to that, Chris, I could not believe it. I came across this article from Andrew Gilligan today in the Telegraph. Now, I'll post this in the chat room in a moment. And the headline here, I'm not saying this as an inflammatory statement, this is actually the headline. Paedophilia is natural and normal for males. Now, it goes on to say here, and it quotes, paedophilic interest is natural and normal for male humans, said the presentation. At least a sizable minority of normal males would like to have sex with children. Normal males are aroused by children. Now, if people are thinking that this is from a pie presentation back in the 70s or 80s, think again, folks, because the statement that paedophilia is natural and normal was made not 3 decades ago, but it was actually made at the Cambridge University just last summer. And it was there was other presentations called Liberating the Paedophile, a discursive analysis, and Danger and Difference, the stakes of hebephilia. Now, hebephilia is a sexual preference of children in early puberty, typically 11 to 14-year-olds. Now, Chris, I could not believe I was reading this, but then you have to tie it back into characters like Harriet Harman, who was trying to basically normalise and legalise incest. This is the country we're living in, and these are the people who are running it.
Yeah. Now, I think we should say, Kev, for the Canadian, American and South American listeners, they may not actually know who Harriet Harman is. But Harriet Harman is really basically the most influential female politician of the recent era. And she sits on a lot of influential committees. And I actually wrote a report about her on my Facebook timeline. If you go to facebook.com/Christopher Everard, be careful, there's a few fake versions of me knocking around there. You can see that really, basically, there hasn't been a woman as influential in British politics since the Thatcher era. And Harriet Harman is married to this chap who actually did a Twitter link, or he did something on Twitter, and it was to do with some kind of porn site. Now, when she was a lawyer, she was actually promoting the Magpie publication and the PIE kind of child sex kind of magazine as part of human rights, as part of feminism, as sexual rights in the 1970s, 1980s. What's really interesting is that the Magpie publication, which is linked to the Paedophile Information Exchange organization that Harriet Harman was getting involved with back then, I believe it was the editor of Magpie was fired from his post at the Open University. He worked at the Open University as a press officer, and he got fired because he was actually running contact advertisements in the back of the Open University magazine, and that would actually put Open University students into contact with the vendors, with the sellers of child pornography.
Unbelievable.
Now the Open University is very famous in Britain, and all of the Open University lectures are broadcast by who? By the BBC. And there's been a financial arrangement between the BBC and the Open University that's been going on for several decades. The BBC broadcasts the Open University lectures. The students sign up, they pay their fees to the Open University, and the BBC get a cut of that. Now, Newsnight is the BBC current affairs show that actually suppressed the investigation into Sir Jimmy Savile. What I find really interesting is that the editor of Pi, or the editorial guy from Magpie, from the Pi publication that's promoting incest and lowering the age of consent, what I find really fascinating is that that guy worked as the press secretary of the Open University, and the Open University just gave an honorary doctorate to Jeremy Paxman, who is the anchorman of Newsnight, which is the BBC show that suppressed the investigation into the Jimmy Savile sex crimes.
Wow. And Chris, just one last thing. I'm glad you brought up the paedophile information exchange there. It was just last week, and it was in I'll check what paper it says. Yeah, it's the Sunday Express, and it was basically saying that the MI5 were quite happy for Pi to be up and running, because what it did was it allowed them to identify and target high-level paedophiles that were actual members.
I see.
The startling thing is, though, Chris, it wasn't actually to go and arrest them. So this ties in exactly with what you were saying. They were collating all this evidence, and it was being used to blackmail them.
That's right. That's right. Now, if you take a global view of, the age of consent for sex, between people, what you'll see is that up until very recently, I think up until, I'd have to look it up, but I think it was up until as recently as 20 years ago, the Vatican City, which is an independent nation state within Europe, had, I believe it was either 12 years old or 14 years old, but it was young. And they had that lower age, because the age of consent, generally speaking, in Europe is 16. The Vatican had that pegged several years lower. And then, of course, if we take a much bigger global view, we can see that in the Muslim world, there are certain commentaries on the Holy Quran, which actually say, you can arrange marriages between adults and children. And then if we take an even bigger geographical view, you can then see that in the Hebrew world, not only is there, kind of sexual contact between adults and children written into the Talmudic laws, especially the Babylonian Talmud that comes from Iraq. But there is then, on top of that, the so-called blood libel. And there have been several blood libels that have really caused a huge amount of problems for the Hebrew community in various countries around Europe. Basically, the blood libel stems from this character, Dr. Faust, Dr. Faustus. He was a real person. Christopher Marlowe, he did actually write plays, and he did, do stage productions based on the life of Dr. Faust. People have got the wrong idea. When you mention Faust, people think of Christopher Marlowe, who's this kind of, Shakespearean type playwright, and they think that Faust is, make-believe. But Dr. Faust really did exist, and he was employed as a magician by the aristocracy in Europe, mostly in Germany. And he was famous for being able to do a pact with the devil, a pact with demonic forces, and he was hired, and he was on the payroll of these German aristocrats. Now, what happened is that wherever Dr. Faust went, there were huge numbers of children going missing. And this is part of what you call the Hebrew blood libel. And it's a libel because, Faust was accused of not only taking the children of Gentiles, because Faust was is a Hebrew kind of doctor of magic, if you like. He was a Hebrew magician, a Kabbalistic magician. The libel comes in where the parents in these small village hamlets were saying, hey, this guy's come into town, he's living the life of old Riley, he's being paid by all these aristocrats, he's doing God knows what kind of magical ceremonies, he's putting his services out to make pacts with the devil as a commercial way of earning money, and our kids are going missing. Now, what happened is that throughout the ages through Europe, there were several of these typical kind of blood libels going on, where groups of parents actually ganged together, and they pointed the finger at usually people in the Jewish community, but not always, but usually it was people in the Jewish community. They weren't only accusing them of actually kidnapping children, they were actually accusing these people of actually using their blood, using the blood of the children in magical sacrifices. And that's a phenomenon which is known as the blood libel. It has actually happened several times throughout Europe.
And Chris, is it true that they actually, this sounds totally bizarre, but do they prefer to scare the children first because they're actually trying to put adrenaline into the blood first, blood magic?
Yep, that's right.
What you've got of the right way of saying that without offending anyone, but it's absolutely disgusting.
That comes down to really the kosher kind of preparation of sacrificed animals, and you've got various other methods, and you've got different kind of religious laws to do with the blood sacrifice of animals. You're not meant to. I mean, this is just one example. Under the Hebrew system, you're not meant to actually consume the blood of an animal. So the animal has to be killed in a certain way so that the blood is removed. Now, in other cultures, I think I could be wrong, I'll have to look it up. I think it's Zoroastrianism. You actually have to very carefully and kind of slyly sacrifice an animal so that the animal remains calm. Because exactly as you say, if an animal or a human or a child or whatever is actually put under a traumatic state, adrenaline is created in the blood, and that is obviously then consumed by anybody that actually eats the meat or drinks the blood after it. There are lots and lots of very, very complicated blood sacrifice kind of laws. The Jewish name for those particular laws, I think it's called something like halakha. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but you're absolutely right. There's certain laws to do with sacrifice, and to do with the actual mental and physical state of the sacrificial victim.
Unbelievable. And Chris, it just sprung back to my mind there. Just the other day, there was a story came out concerning Bohemian Grove. Obviously, all the elites love to go and meet there. But there was actually body parts had turned up. Now, this was in the media last week.
Yes.
There wasn't much of a follow-up on that. But quite bizarre. I didn't know if you'd caught that one coming across the news wires.
I'd heard rumours before. I mean, obviously, you're dealing with a very, very big geographical area. You've got the Russian River, which runs through the Bohemian Grove estate. I think a lot of people have got the wrong idea. They think that Bohemian Grove in Northern California is the headquarters of, this brotherhood. It's not. The actual headquarters of the Bohemian Club is actually in San Francisco, and they actually own their own building. They raised the money for this building more than 100 years. Oh, actually, is it 200 years ago? It's a long time ago. I believe it's got 4 floors. On the ground floor, you've got a very, very nice gentleman's club with its own bar, and it's got these very large round tables. There's not really any individual tables where you can, sort of sit there and have a quiet drink on your own. They deliberately have these large round tables in the Bohemian Club bar that foster groupings of men. Basically, it's a club which is only for men. And according to tapes of Richard Nixon, the former president, these tapes were actually recorded by a machine placed into the drawer of the desk in the Oval Office. And you can hear this on my film Superstate. If you want to watch all of my documentaries, you can go to enigmatv.com and you can sign up, and there's a ton of documentaries there. I've had to sort of host my own documentaries because I kept having my films censored and re-edited when they were on video sharing websites. And you can hear Richard Nixon in my film Superstate actually say that in his opinion, the Bohemian Club was basically under the control of homosexual men. And they had been like that since the days of a poet and a writer called Jack London. Now, what's really fascinating is that the Queen and Prince Philip have both been guests of the Bohemian Club. which is this gentleman's club. It doesn't allow women to be members. And yes, they have this private kind of area. It's a densely forested, it's redwood forest up in Northern California. And they have, you know, the famous fiberglass and concrete owl. And the Queen and Prince Philip have been guests there, which I find very strange. And yes, like you say, there's been, you know, human remains found there. What I find interesting is that human remains were actually found on the bridle track where the Queen rides her horse in the mornings in England. And there were also human remains, virtually an entire decomposed body of a man, I believe he came from either the USA or Canada, found in the inside of a hollowed out trunk on an island in St. James's Park, literally a stone's throw from the doorway of Buckingham Palace. And this body was inside that trunk. And it had been there for a very long time. It had decomposed, and it came to light that this man had actually sent letters to the Queen, and he had actually written critical letters to the Queen, and then it just so happens that he ends up with his body decomposing inside a tree trunk, which could even be seen from the window of the Queen's bedroom.
Oh, that's bizarre.
It is bizarre.
The story of one of, was it not the Yorkshire Ripper, one of his bodies turning up near Jimmy Savile's house.
Oh, really?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah,
that's interesting. Wow.
Yeah, it was a flat that he had in Leeds, and then obviously we've now found out that Jimmy Savile was going to visit the Yorkshire Ripper whilst he was in a secure mental wing. So.
I see. Yeah, because you know, I think the thing about Sir Jimmy Savile, I mean, he was a knight of the realm.
It's funny how they all get knighted, isn't it?
Oh, I mean, you know, he was
one of the club, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, it's so suspicious because, you know, he was using his ties and his friendships with Prince Charles, the Queen, and also the Queen's mother. You know, and obviously he was able to get the keys to all these places.
Well, Chris, what about Max Clifford? Because I thought he would have enough dirt on the royal household and high-level paedophiles, etc., that he would be basically bulletproof. But we've seen him being sailed down the river just lately.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Max Clifford actually admitted that he was paid just as much to suppress news as he was paid to actually get people into the headlines.
Definitely.
He was a public relations guru.
It's the stories that he didn't publish I would love to see.
Yeah, that's
Definitely.
right. Yeah, well, I just found a picture of him today, actually, with Antonia de Sancha. Antonia de Sancha is this actress who was in a toe-sucking scandal with David Mellor, who was a minister in the Tory government just a few years ago. And it's really interesting because these documents that were given to the Home Office by a former member of Parliament, it's David Mellor who himself was in this toe-sucking sex scandal with this lady who is described as an actress. It's David Mellor who's actually saying, oh, you know, we should let, you know, Leon Britton off the hook for losing all these important documents that were detailing sex crimes. I think it was Geoffrey Dickens, if I'm right, who's dead now. And Geoffrey Dickens is the member of Parliament who actually provided the Home Office with the names, the situations, and the details of how children were being abused by senior members of British society.
But Chris, it's just going to be one big media circus around this dossier from the 80s and 90s. Meanwhile, there are still children getting raped by parliamentaries today. Yeah. And that's what really angers me, because we're basically being served up. It'll probably be a couple of dead politicians like Cyril Smith. There's one example.
Yeah.
And yet there's still people in there today and it's still going on.
Yeah. Yeah, well, my grandmother worked as the housekeeper of Sir Edward Heath, who was a Conservative Prime Minister. He never married. He never actually publicly said that he was homosexual. Now, I mean, you know, obviously there's nothing wrong with being homosexual, but if you're the Prime Minister and you keep a secret like that in your cupboard, it opens you up to enormous chances of being blackmailed. And what my grandmother told me is that he had his own apartment at Piccadilly Circus. And there were these rent boys, 13, 14-year-old boys, who were sleeping rough. And they would queue up outside the doors of Sir Edward Heath's apartment in London. And sometimes he used to take them away for the weekend on his yacht, and he used to take them to the Scilly Isles. Now, there are many of these islands. There's the Channel Islands like Jersey, Guernsey, Sark, Alderney, and also the Scilly Isles. Have you ever seen the movie, Kev, The Wicker Man?
No, I have not, Chris. I've heard of it, but I haven't actually seen it.
Well, it's based on... It's a book by Anthony Schaffer, and he based it on rumours that he'd heard of an aristocratic, pagan sex cult operating on a Scottish island. And I can tell you now, Anthony Schaffer hit the nail on the head. Now, we've got a break coming up, Kev. Are you going to stay with me for the last part of the show? Are you going to go?
Oh, I'd love to stay with you, Chris.
Okay. Now, are the ads with us, Kev?
You are now entering Star Clear.
Star Clear with Jeffrey Seelman. Thursdays on Truth Frequency Radio.
Welcome back. This is Chris Everard broadcasting live with my special guest, Mr. Kev Baker from Scotland. We're discussing MI5, Her Majesty's Intelligence Operations, and the background checks which were never done, seemingly, on paedophiles working for the BBC. Now, last summer, Kev, I actually went to do a little bit of filming inside Buckingham Palace. And there's a section of Buckingham Palace which is called the Queen's Gallery, and you can actually apply, to go there with your camera, and you can actually take pictures of a very small percentage of these amazing artworks which are owned by Her Majesty the Queen. And on that trip last year, I also went to the Grand Lodge of England, which is not far from Buckingham Palace. The amount of checks that they did on me was unbelievable. I had to take a photocopy of my passport. The Freemasons didn't answer my first two emails. I had to actually send them a proper letter so that they knew exactly that I was there, filming for the Enigma channel. And they did a very extensive check on me, and all I was doing was just turning up with a camera making a documentary film for the Enigma channel. Now, how comes you've got decades of people like Stuart Hall and Rolf Harris and Gary Glitter, allegedly also on BBC premises, and Sir Jimmy Savile? How is it that Paul Gambaccini, the American DJ at Broadcasting House, had his own show on the BBC? How is it that he knew that there were children being abused on BBC premises, but MI5 didn't know anything?
Well, you see, Chris, we kind of covered this in the break. Possibly MI5 knew fine well what was going on, and that was why these people ended up with the big contracts at the BBC. Yeah. You said it yourself in the first half. Look at the statue outside Broadcasting House.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a symbol of what actually goes on in there.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's meant to be Prospero. It's a Shakespearean type character who's a very wise wizard or magician. And the child is meant to be Ariel, who is the novice apprentice, the magician's apprentice. And the interesting thing is that statue is part of a series that had been carved by a paedophile, Eric Gill, or Eric Gill. And Broadcasting House itself, if you go down into the basement of Broadcasting House, there is a very, very fascinating mini museum down there. And you can see the construction photographs of Broadcasting House. It was actually chosen as a site because it's a nexus point where many ley lines actually meet. And it's actually based at the top of Regent Street. And Regent Street in London is called Regent Street because it's actually owned by Buckingham Palace.
Wow.
The entire street
and the
entire area is owned by Buckingham Palace.
To give the listeners an idea of these ley lines and the power that they contain, or they're believed to contain, Aleister Crowley, that's why he selected Boleskine House up near Loch Ness, because it too was a convergence of these lines. So folks listening out there, you have to start thinking about what was really going on in BBC House.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, you'll find that it was designed as a kind of cathedral to radio waves. That was the idea. It was going to be a cathedral to broadcasting. Well, what you find in the basement of all of these medieval cathedrals that were financed by the Knights Templar is that if you travel around, you'll see that they are built on top of very ancient temples. Now, these ancient temples, many of them, not all of them, but many of them hosted blood sacrifice of animals. And the Roman ones, I am absolutely sure that Caesars of the Roman Empire, not all of them, but some of them, were into infanticide. And there is a very interesting book called Caligula by Gore Vidal. And it kind of is a fictionalized, it's a mixture of fact and fiction, and it shows you the kind of sexual depravity that was going on between adults and children in the Roman Empire. Now, if we turn the clock back even a bit further, before the Roman Empire, and we see the Macedonian Empire, Alexander the Great, and the other great empires of the northern shores of the Mediterranean Sea, you only have to sort of start digging around a little bit, and you start seeing that children were the number one target as being sacrificial victims. There's no question about it. Now, Aleister Crowley, who you just mentioned, in the Book of the Law, which was supposedly channeled by Rose Crowley, who is Aleister Crowley's wife, in a hotel room in 1904 in Cairo, Rose Crowley was allegedly saying the most suitable sacrificial victim was a young boy of above average intelligence, aged about 8 or 9 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, the other thing that a lot of the newspapers have missed out on, and I must bring this up because this is something that I researched very heavily and is never, ever mentioned in the media, is that the royal family are actually the patrons of several big hospitals. And one of them is the Bristol Royal Infirmary. And it's had royal patrons, you know, this is members of the royal family, giving them donations and visiting, you know, for decades. That is where a huge scandal took place, where there were organs of children. Some of them were fetuses, some of them had been born, they were organs from babies, some of them were organs of older children, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they'd been extracted from the bodies of those children without the parents' consent. For some reason, a giant archive of these organs was being kept at Bristol Royal Infirmary, and there were even allegations that those organs had been extracted from fetuses and young babies that were then murdered using excessive amounts of anesthetic gas. Now, that is not the only situation. There was a very similar situation like that up in Liverpool as well. The Bristol Royal Infirmary scandal is not isolated. Now, what do we see with Sir Jimmy Savile? Where do we see Sir Jimmy Savile hanging out? We saw him working as a porter at Stoke Mandeville Children's Hospital, where he was actually wheeling children from the surgical theatre, where they're still under the effects of anaesthetic. He was given command of those beds, of those trolley beds, with those children who were there fast asleep, fresh out of surgery, and he was working supposedly as a voluntary porter. Not only was he working at Stoke Mandeville Hospital, he even had his own room where he would actually sleep there at night.
They even called him Dr. Jimmy on occasion.
Oh, really?
It's utterly disgusting.
Wow.
But it's turned out
I did not know that.
Yeah, and it's turned out now,
that.
just in the past few days after the court case had finished with Rolf Harris, we found out that the two of them were visiting these hospitals together.
Oh, I did not, because I saw their names linked in the newspapers, but I've had a very, very busy week and I didn't have time to read up everything.
Now, I haven't seen Rolf Harris been linked to this one, but in my research into this in the past, because it's a topic that I will continue to try and expose, Chris,
yeah.
But I came across a number of articles that said that Jimmy Savile was actually taking celebrity friends to Broadmoor Hospital to meet with the likes of the Yorkshire Ripper, etc.
Yeah.
Unbelievable how deep this goes. It's so deep-rooted. People might think that can't be true, but it's probably worse than what we're saying.
It probably is.
Yeah,
now,
we're just scratching the surface.
I've got a question for you, Kev, about the British newspapers. Have any of the newspapers or any of the British TV channels picked up on the weird word symbolism in Rolf Harris's hit records?
No, not at all. It was only your posting on Facebook that I had seen that made me actually think about it.
Okay, well, he was meant to have sold, huge amounts of records. I mean, quite frankly, the music industry, the film industry, and the television industry, I don't think I'm being anti-Semitic or weird in saying this, but there are certain families in control of those industries, and the people that end up becoming stars in those industries have to fit in to a certain family genealogical line. I don't mean that they are all from Hebrew families, but I would say that about 90% of them are. Now, for Rolf Harris to come along and supposedly sell 2 million records is quite an achievement. I remember this song, Two Little Boys Had Two Little Toys. Of course, the two riders on a single horse is the international emblem of the Knights Templar secret society. And they built those cathedrals, which have nothing to do with biblical Christianity. In actual fact, Amiens Cathedral, built by the Knights Templar, has an inverted pentagram in it. And I remember seeing the cover of Rolf Harris's record. It had two riders on a single horse. They didn't particularly look like little boys. They were just like two riders. And that is a symbol from the Knights Templar.
You see, Chris, this is what makes me wonder whether that's the kind of thing they have to put out there. He puts his name to a symbol like that, and that's why he gets the protection to carry on the crimes that he commits, and he gets kept close to the royal family as well, Charles, the rest of them, by being given a knighthood, no less.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Well, no,
now, and then there was another weird thing, and this was on the Cilla Black show. I mean, it was on a kids' show. I can't remember the name of it. I saw it live myself, which is Jake the Peg, the man with the third wooden leg. And that's Rolf Harris again. And I remember seeing that when I was a kid. I remember thinking, this is weird. There's a ring of kids sitting cross-legged on the floor, and he's doing this weird song, and he's doing this weird dance.
It's just absolutely...
I mean, and it was at this actual period where he's there in a long raincoat, which is like, it's like a kind of stereotypical sex flasher that you get out in supermarkets and in high streets. They wear these long coats and flash themselves at children. And he's actually getting paid huge amounts of money. And apparently, Jake the Peg with a wooden leg sold 1 million copies and he got a gold record.
And what about Esther Ranson, Chris? Because back in that era of television, she was very prominent as well, and she had the child line that was set up.
That's
now,
right.
It puts a whole different spin on what was happening with the names and addresses of these kids that were actually phoning in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Well, Esther Ranson, again, I'll have to come back to this. You know, she's had a very, very long BBC career. If it wasn't for the BBC, Rolf Harris, Stuart Hall, Sir Jimmy Savile, Esther Ranson, several of the others, like this Mr. D'Arth, who spells his second name is Death, who was a senior director or producer at the BBC, who actually supplied the Metropolitan Police with the background information about Jimmy Savile. None of these people would have the luxury lifestyles that they've had it not been for the BBC. Esther Ranson is another one. And I have to say, Kev, that Childline was one aspect of what I found was a bit of a questionable situation. The other one is Children in Need, which is the BBC charity that was actually exposed as a scam, not on one count, but on two counts. For example, the big credit card companies, they were saying you can donate by credit card. People thought that if they donated 25 quid, say, using their credit card to Children in Need got the 25 quid. They did not.
Wow,
a large chunk of that was taken by the credit card companies.
I mean, you just have to look at the emblem, the actual guy that they use. It's Pudsey Bear.
Yeah.
Now, Stanley Kubrick, he used to use bears in his films to actually signify paedophilia. Chris,
Oh,
it's
really?
actually it's a code word for paedophilia.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It is, yes. That's what they actually use to get around censorship on the internet and things. Bears, that's what they call themselves. This sounds utterly sick, but I've watched a lot of documentaries on this, a lot of exposés. They call themselves bears because they're hairy, big adults. I know it sounds sick, Chris, but that's what they do. And when I seen that one-eyed bear, because he's got a patch over one eye, I mean, what are we really watching here?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, that kind of symbolism ties in with the situation of Broadmoor with Sir Jimmy Savile, and Sir Jimmy Savile also at Stoke Mandeville, which was a children's hospital. It's so sick, it's unbelievable. Now, what I want to bring up, Kev, is not only Harriet Harman, but also this situation with her husband, because it seems that he actually made a tweet or he did something on Twitter, and he liked or he added he started following one of these porn sites. And it seems to me that Harriet Harman and her husband is meant to be, let me just find my notes here. He's actually meant to be the shadow. Hang on, let me just find these notes. It's quite incredible.
I'd hate to see your desk, Chris, the amount of notes and things you must have, but I'd love to get locked in your library someday. That would be fascinating.
Right, I've got shall I just read from my notes here?
Go for it,
I've
Chris.
said here, in 2009, senior government minister Harriet Harman had been the leader of the House of Commons and Minister for Women and Equality. She also sat on a cabinet committee on young people's welfare. And what I've written here is it's all the front. I've said that this senior British minister in Her Majesty's government is and has always been promoting a clandestine and non-orthodox sexual change to Britain's laws. The British Daily Telegraph obtained documents showing that Harriet Harman called on ministers to make sexually explicit photographs or films of children legal unless there was evidence that the subject had been harmed. This is really old news, but very important nowadays due to the revelations that the BBC made several pedo kids TV presenters millionaires, and more than 1,000 child sex crimes were perpetrated on BBC premises. At the start of her career, Harriet Harman and her shadow minister husband were all lobbying for the human right, that's in speech marks, to have sex with children via Magpie magazine, which was distributed in the late 1970s to members of PIE, the Paedophile Information Exchange, the name of a far-left lobby group. Many of the members had non-conformist Hebrew, Marxist, lawyer and British government-type connections. They espoused child sex as a human right and essentially promoted an open sex political strategy combined with a lowering of the age of consent. In a nutshell, Magpie supporters called for legislation to legalize child sex and the age of consent to be lowered to 4 years of age. Harriet Harman is allegedly said to have supported the idea of decriminalizing incest. And the last thing I've written here is that the new BBC connection to Magpie and PIE and Harriet Harman that I've discovered recently is that the Paedophile Information Exchange's main editor is a man called Tom O'Carroll. He worked as a press officer for the Open University. And the Open University has had a long-term relationship with the BBC and has had thousands of its courses broadcast by the BBC. Tom O'Carroll was jailed for conspiring to corrupt public morals by publishing contact advertisements which put readers in touch with the vendors of child porn. How about that? Now, Jeremy Paxman, he's the anchorman for the BBC Newsnight TV show, and he received an honorary doctorate from the Open University. It was the Newsnight TV show which had actually suppressed and censored a report about Sir Jimmy Savile buggering dozens of teenagers on BBC premises. This PIE BBC Open University link is the last nail in the coffin for the BBC government pedo ring, which has been exposed right here on this page. And I wrote that before I started this broadcast.
And Chris, this should be the point where people just refuse point blank to give any more money to that organisation whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, how many celebrities have to be exposed for this before people actually care what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bit of a funny story. They had these BBC detector vans patrolling our neighbourhood when we were kids, and my sister, she actually ran up to one of these BBC detector vans as it went down the road, and she opened the back door of the van. I mean, I think she was about 12, 14 years old. She opened the back of the van and there was nothing in there. It was literally a scam.
It's like the Stasi, Chris. They just put out the idea that you're going to get charged for it and there's these vans watching you, but really you're self-policing yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they had these kind of weird white aerials on the tops, on the roofs of these blue vans. It's all a scam. They were running TV commercials. There was a scene that was meant to be the interior of one of these detector vans, and there's a guy sitting there, and they're scanning a neighborhood looking for people that were watching TV who hadn't bought a BBC license, and he looks up and he says, "There's somebody at number 19 with the television on. They're watching Columbo." And it's all a scam. It's a scam to get money out of the public. And like I said at the beginning of the broadcast, the BBC remit, and this is a very important thing. By the way, the BBC test broadcast kind of image wasn't a standard image in the early days of the BBC. It was a sculpture that was at Alexandra Palace, which is where the BBC used to broadcast from before they moved to Bush House. And it was a sculpture that used to be animated and revolve around on an electric turntable. And you know what it was, Kev? It was the all-seeing eye.
Wow.
Then they changed it to a photograph of a young girl with balloons and a clown.
Yeah, that's what I actually thought you were going to bring up. She was utterly creepy. I was just a wee guy when I was seeing that, and it wasn't the best of sights before you went to bed. But
coming back to this BBC detector van scam, you'd seen the scene with the bloke saying, "Oh yeah, we know exactly what they're watching. They're watching Columbo," which is an impossibility, by the way. The only way that they would have been able to know which household was watching which TV show is by using audio microphones and actually bugging or using super directional microphones. Of course, that's illegal under the law.
I'll tell you what,
to have a Home Office tapping permit or warrant to actually bug somebody's house. So the entire BBC detector van situation, it's illegal from beginning to end. And that illegality and the lies which you saw in those television commercials, that alone is sufficient legal grounds to take the BBC to court. And have basically a class action with millions of BBC license fee payers getting refunds from the BBC.
Compare those vans to the Google cars they've got now.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, they're grabbing all your Wi-Fi data, absolutely everything.
Yeah, well, the most essential piece of data, and we know this from a court case in Germany, because Google have actually lost some court cases to do with those streetcars. There was an interesting case in Germany. The most important piece of data that was collected from people's houses was not a photograph of their garden gate or their front door or the pavement outside their house, supposedly for Google Maps. The most essential information that was being collected was the password of people's Wi-Fi routers. How about that? And there was a court case, I believe it was either Germany or France, and it went against Google, and the ruling said that they had to destroy the data. I mean, yeah, right.
Yeah, Google will be an automated car that's going to be grabbing that soon with their autonomous motors that they're releasing. Oh.
Wow. Well, we're coming to the end of the show, Kev. Thanks very, very much for joining us. I want to say to the listeners that there is a huge archive of our radio shows, Kev's radio shows and my own radio shows. You go to truthfrequencyradio.com and you click there's a big panel with a white rabbit and it says, "Did you miss your favorite show?" You click that and you can actually scroll through all of the archives there. I've made a whole new load of TV shows for the Enigma channel. I've made 83 TV shows just in the last few months. And there's hundreds of TV shows on the Enigma channel. We've opened up a new server network. We're using 80 gigabyte flash RAM delivery for our video now, so that the movies and the TV shows play out in virtual HD quality. There's none of this stuttering or anything going on like that. It's not like using a commercial video sharing website. All the TV shows play nicely. And Kev, do you want to just tell people what's coming up on your show?
Yeah, well, this week I'm actually going to be doing a special on Friday night with Dr. John Waterman. I'm going to be on from 9 till 11 with him. We're going to be going into his experience, or his father's experience, with the Philadelphia experiment.
Oh, that's interesting.
So that's going to be utterly fascinating.
Yeah, I actually met Al Bielek in Amsterdam 2 times.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah.
There's something we need to get into.
Yeah, I had long conversations with Al Bielek. I mean, Al was a very fascinating man, but I have to say that over the years that I knew him, he actually did the exact same lecture, the exact same presentation, almost word for word. It was very interesting and it was very, very complicated, but he did actually repeat himself a hell of a lot.